everybody. So where did you get the idea of who you were going to be when you grew up? When I was little, that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to somehow have a chance to put on that cosplay outfit, to put on that costume there, and maybe have a chance to actually become an astronaut. I had no idea how to do it. I'm from Canada. We didn't have astronauts, no rocket ships, no space agency. But I just thought, that's what I want to do. And what really inspired me, what really made me think that someday I might have a chance, was reading comic books. I loved comic books. I mean, about look at that guy, he's breathing out of a fire extinguisher. And look at that knife, the knife he's wearing. Don't have a big sharp knife next to your pressure suit, it's a bad idea. But I just looked at those comic books, I leafed through them as a kid. I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to have, who want a ray gun? Who doesn't want a ray gun when you're a little kid? That's what I dreamed of. And so I thought I'd better start getting my own Comic-Con on when I was little. I got my very first costume organized. I knew I needed a helmet, so I got myself all... That's me in my first astronaut outfit, but I didn't know how to get there. You know, I didn't know what I was supposed to do till this movie came along.
And that's been covered up by natural erosion or other forces. It seems to have been deliberately buried.
Very powerful.
And I thought maybe I could even put on a better costume. And so at a very recent Comic-Con, with an unnamed artist and Andy Weir, we got these, actually this is who the unnamed artist was. But way before that, I was still puzzling and thinking, how am I going to get on a spacewalk? I mean, I was practicing for spacewalking right from the very beginning, but it was still a long way from the reality. And when I was about 5 or 6, thinking about how do I get from here to there, the importance of role-playing, the importance of science fiction and examples, because along came this guy. And suddenly, holy cow, that guy, look at him. He's handsome, he's got great hair, he's a leader, he's a commander of he's Canadian, right, from Montreal. I thought, wow, if James Tiberius Kirk can be out there, then maybe I could too. But the important part was it wasn't just pretend. At the same time, people were really actually starting to fly in space. With Yuri Gagarin, another good-looking guy, and the first American astronauts, of course, that's Al Shepard, in the top left, first American in space, walked on the moon, and John Glenn, first American to orbit. Suddenly, it seemed possible, not just fantasy. And so this little boy here in the summer of '69, wearing an excellent V-neck sweater, I watched what Neil and Buzz did with Mike orbiting 50 years ago this summer, almost, 3 weeks ago, a month ago. And what they did, especially what Neil did, because look at him. He's no Bill Shatner. You know, Neil just looks like a guy. You could walk by him in the hardware store. You'd never have any idea that he grabbed hold of Eagle when they couldn't land there where they were supposed to because of boulders, and manually flew it around for a while and found the appropriate spot and touched Eagle down and reached over and shut off the engines and said, Tranquility Base, here the Eagle has landed. And when Neil did that, he had 16 seconds of fuel left. And that's what impressed that little boy. He was those fantasy characters, but he was real. And that convinced me that maybe I could. If he could, maybe I could. And so I thought, well, I need to learn to fly. So I got my first flight suit and learned to fly gliders with a cadet program, and then learned to fly powered airplanes. And then I thought maybe a mustache would be important, and so went to the military academies, and then became a fighter pilot, and then test pilot school just over at Edwards. And then finally, Canada had an astronaut selection, and in the summer of '92, along with Julie and Mike and Dave, was selected as an astronaut. I got sent right down to Houston, Texas, with all those other little girls and boys, who their flight suits were still brand new. They were more like a costume than an actual flight suit. All of us who had dreamed as little kids that maybe we could turn ourselves into somebody else, that if we worked hard enough on who we were every single day, maybe someday our space agency would call us and say, we want you to fly a spaceship. And even more amazing to me is 3.5 years after that group of kids took a picture, for the very first time in my life, I had a chance to do this.
2, 1, boost ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions.
Yeah, it's way louder than that. You are crushed in your seat. You are shaken like you wouldn't believe. It's like a bunch of people are jumping up and down on your chest. You can't even focus on the instruments as the vehicle powers its way through the atmosphere. You go through the speed of sound in 45 seconds, accelerating straight up. It has 80 million horsepower. And you can feel every one of those horses kicking you in the back. And after 2 minutes, those big white solid rockets explode off and fall into the Atlantic.
Solid rocket booster separation confirmed. Guidance now converging.
And now that's you, accelerating away. You only left Earth 2 minutes ago, and the sky is already completely black. The atmosphere is just that little bit of blue fuzz way below you. And the engines power you away for another 6 minutes like this slick, a hydraulic dragster, just with your foot to the floor, watching the Mach meter go Mach 18, Mach 19, Mach 20, as the vehicle rams its way up until finally, after 8.5 minutes, the vehicle is perfectly at the right speed and altitude, going exactly the right direction, and the engine shut off, and you're weightless. If you ever get the chance, take a ride like that one. It is the best thing ever. But it all started with me imagining things early in astronaut training there in a box. If the engines had just shut off, every single one of you would have the same reaction. You'd laugh, you'd make sure the ship was healthy, and then you'd want to go look at the world. And this is floated to the window, looking out at our planet. And this isn't like an opening scene from 2001. That's a sunrise on orbit. And they happen so fast. And you come across the world at 5 miles a second. There's, of course, San Francisco. You can see the shadow from the Golden Gate on the water underneath. And looking across the U.S. in the dark and up into Canada, there's Lake Michigan, Detroit, Chicago, Toronto, Montreal, and the universe. Suddenly that is out your window. And in just a glance, from Cuba, the Bahamas, Florida, the Keys, all the way up to New York on the right, New Orleans on the left, Chicago under the cloud. In one glance, you can see stuff you only imagine. And it's not this vehicle that lets us get there, although this is the one that spawned the idea. It's this vehicle. This is for real. This is where 6 people are living right now, and where I had a chance to command the spaceship. And it is so much fun. I mean, if you spill your water here, it's boring. You know? Probably not even encouraged, I would bet. But if you spill your water on a spaceship, that's what it does. it becomes this living bubble, and so you play with water and you pull your knees up and do 1,000 somersaults and push off and fly like Julie, and it's just joyful and magic. It's hard on your hairdo, but it is a blast to be able to do it. And you play with it constantly. If you light a candle, it behaves so differently. Trying to grow crops. Peggy Whitson, a rock star of an astronaut, she's a PhD biochemist and a pilot, but also a farmer, grew up in Iowa. She's growing stuff up on the space station, trying to learn how to take us to the moon and Mars, where we can't bring all our food with us. As I say, if you light a candle up there, that's an earth candle where gravity pulls the heat up. But if you light a candle in weightlessness, that's what it does. There's no convection. There's only the diffusion of the random oxygen molecules to feed the flame, so it ends up becoming this pathetic little thing. It's an amazing laboratory to play with water. Okay. So here's a soaking wet washcloth. Get the microphone so you can hear me while I'm talking. And now let's start wringing it out. I love how my watch floats. It's really wet on my wrist. Things behave differently all of a sudden. It's an amazing laboratory. Your whole body changes. Your physiology changes, your blood pressure, the size of your heart, your bones, your muscles, your balance system. It's an amazing place to be, but it's such a cool place because sometimes we have to go outside. And to open up the hatch and pull yourself out into the universe, to suddenly go from the comfort of the inside of the spaceship to now, that's Chris Cassidy outside, being surrounded by the immensity. And it's a wicked place to be. It's in the shade, it's minus 200. In the sun, it's plus 310. Hot, 1.5 boiling water outside and colder than dry ice in the shaded side. And that's just from his left shoulder to his right shoulder. And you're constantly peppered by tiny meteorites. You're sandblasted by the universe. And the suit is pressurized and stiff. And resists every motion. It beats you up. You come in with bloody, and sometimes we rip a fingernail off. The suit's so hard in our bodies. Although I did notice when Sandra Bullock did her spacewalk in Gravity, she came back in and her hair was still nice, you know? She had those little black underwear on. She looked great. And it's not like that. But I've done 2 spacewalks. And to be out there sensing that the Earth is just a planet. You're not part of the Earth. You're a spaceling. And we were coming across in the darkness, and I shut those lights off so that I could see Australia in the darkness. But as we came south of Australia, with my eyes adjusted for night vision, we went through the aurora. And this isn't some Steven Spielberg graphic. This isn't some CGI thing. This is what our Earth looks like. That's the aurora of our planet. And it was rippling between my legs and pouring past the ship. It's just so incredibly beautiful. That little boy in a box surfing on the aurora. So where are we going next? What's the biggest challenge now? Launch is still the hardest thing. If you take the most experienced astronaut in American history, Peggy Whitson, commanded the space station twice. She's got 665 days off the spaceship. If you take all of Peggy's life, the most experienced astronaut the United States has ever produced, half of the risk she faced in her whole life is in the 27 minutes that she rode rockets. It's that dangerous. So who's working on it? What are we doing next? And Richard just opened up his spaceport in New Mexico. Jeff's working on it really hard. Elon, as everybody knows, is working on it. They're all looking to try and make launch simpler and therefore cheaper and safer. And Elon's out front. He looked at that shuttle design and improved it and said, what if we could land those rockets instead of them falling in the ocean? And of course it's not going to work. Things are going to go wrong. The reality of spaceflight is you have to be ready for failure. But a little over 4 years ago, for the very first time, They tried to land one of these rockets, a rocket that pushed a satellite above the atmosphere, tried to land one on a barge, just a little over 4 years ago. This is how their very first test went. So pretty good. Made it back to the barge, that's good. But it's great. Imagine if they got lucky and got away with it the first time. They would have learned nothing. But fortunately, there's nobody out there. It's an unmanned barge. It was going to land in the ocean anyway. So early success is a terrible teacher. Early failure is what you want when the stakes are low. And they kept working on it. And just a little over 3 years ago, back in 2016, just when Adam and I were walking around Comic-Con wearing those suits, this is what the girls and the boys at SpaceX did. On a day off the coast of Florida when the wind was howling at 50 knots. This is just 3 years ago. They landed that thing on a barge. And when they brought it into port, it was fine. Elon was right. You can just clean it up, check the wiring, fill it up with fuel, and use it again. And he went from crazy to owning the world's launch market. And he's not done yet, of course. I mean, what should we be targeting? Where should we be going now? You know, those early visions of 2001, back in the late 60s, this is a picture I took of the moon from orbit. And we just recently, within the last year, found about 200 billion gallons of water on the moon. Everywhere there's light blue, at the South Pole and the North Pole, there's deep glaciers of ice. And if you got water, you got hydrogen and oxygen. So you got something to breathe, something to drink, and fuel. So it's an amazing resource. And now everybody's thinking the moon's where we got to go. All the space agencies, NASA in partnership with Canada and other space agencies, the Europeans, and Elon's not done either, of course. He's working on this thing, which his original name for it was the BFR, the Big Flying Rocket. He's recently renamed it Starship, and they just did a great test of the Hopper version of it. This just a couple of weeks ago. Down in Texas. They're going to take a test up a few hundred feet on Wednesday, I think. But this, I mean, that's where we're headed. That's what we're doing. And this is the 2001 little kid comic book thing that Elon's drawing. It won't look like that. But you need to inspire people. You got to give them a crazy idea, something that's different than what you have right now. Allow people to imagine a different future, because we absolutely need it. We've got serious problems to solve on Earth, just like they were talking about on stage. You can't do things the same way or nothing's going to change. You have to imagine things. We have to put examples in front of our little kids. It's great if you're an astronaut. People send you pictures of their kids like this all the time. And that little girl on the right, her parents said she watched my version of Oddity over and over. And I started thinking, what does she think is impossible? You know, look at her. How old is she? She's got a diaper on, the little fat elbows. She's like, I don't know, 18 months, maybe. No one's ever explained anything to her, but she already knows what everything does. She knows what a mouse does, headphones, shoes, a table. She knows what moms do, and she knows what dads do. And no one has explained one thing to her. And almost everything you ever decided not to do, nobody told you you couldn't. You just looked around and said, that's something that people like me don't do. And so to me, it's so important to put examples in front of our kids that are different, that allow them to imagine themselves. Like, that's NASA's newest astronaut class. There are 2 Canadians in it. Amazing people from all around the country and Canada. These are the people that are going to start living on the moon over the next 15 years. And we are making those things happen. All right, little view of the bay here, and I think we're just in the lower left of the picture that I took from orbit. I love how you can see the San Andreas Fault from space. Dead straight line across the green. I'll bring us back to Earth and then maybe bring somebody up. On my third flight, I was the pilot of a Russian spaceship. Soyuz, and parts of it just burn up in the atmosphere. And the only part that survives is this little titanium capsule that the three of us are in. And it's just big enough inside for 3 people. This is what a spaceship really looks like. That's business class right there. That's as good as it gets. But I was ready for it. I'd been training for it. And it comes plummeting down into the atmosphere, and we just use friction and heat to slow down. And that's actually the view out the window as we come ripping into the atmosphere. And it's 3,000 degrees outside. And those are pieces of your spaceship burning off and going by the window. It's an interesting place to be. And finally, you've slowed down enough that you can open a parachute. And when we get to about 15,000 feet, we blow the plugs and we can smell the Earth for the first time in 6 months. It's a wonderful feeling. And then just before we hit the ground, we fire some plugs to, we fire a couple little rockets to slow us down about this high above the ground to keep us from smucking into the world too hard. This is what landing looks like. Ouch.
And touchdown.
Now inside.
Jest. Zapis.
Yeah. What Anton said was хорошо. Если видно говорите по-русски, что он сказал хорошо. What he said was great. And your vehicle has to tumble and roll to a stop, and that's our spaceship. Great little ship, tough as nails, wonderful little thing. And I was NASA's director in Russia, wonderful. Their politics are a mess. The people are great. A sense of history and culture and soul that we do not have in North America. But they're northern people, like Canadians. They're practical people. So winter is always coming. So they roll the ship the right way around. They open up the hatch. They're like, привет, бабушки, как вы живете? And they drag us out, and it is like being born. And they brought along some deck chairs, and they plunk you down in a deck chair, and they hand you a sat phone so you can call your family. And you feel terrible. You want to throw up. If you stand up, you faint. But you are Neil Armstrong. You are James T. Kirk. You are whatever, Buzz Lightyear. Whoever you're fascinated by all those years. You stick your thumb up and you say, I feel great. That's what spaceflight is like. And what do you do with the experience? And that's part of the reason I'm here to talk to you today. What do you do with an experience like spaceflight? What do you do to think about it? And I think it's really important not just to have the experience, but to find ways to share it and inspire other people. And to have someone who does that better than anyone I know, who takes complicated ideas, expresses them in a way that everybody finds interesting, makes everybody curious, and he's a good friend for many years now. If I could bring to the stage the inimitable Adam Savage.
Worst follow I have ever had to do in my whole life.
I think the plan is he and I are going to chat for a few minutes, and then maybe we'll see if anybody in the audience has questions. Sound good?
Yeah.
But so was there anything in that raised any questions in your head, or anything you want to tell us about what you're up to?
The thing that I love most about knowing you is that you are immediately always deeply in touch with the wonder of what you got to do. So about 5 years ago, Chris was in San Francisco, and my mom happened to be in town, so we were all going to go out to dinner. And we went by my cave, and I had just finished my captain's chair, my Captain Kirk chair. And I was like, Chris, you got to sit in the captain's chair. He was like, okay. And he sits, and the thing about the Captain Kirk chair is the moment you sit in it, it makes you sit like Kirk. It's amazing. You immediately get this swagger, you man spread, it's fabulous.
Your next book, you should call it Sit Like Kirk.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then Chris sits there and he turns to my mom and he says, I have in fact commanded a spaceship. So I my R2-D2 sat next to the captain's chair, and I tweeted that picture to Bill Shatner, and his response was, "What's the blue thing next to my chair?" I have a question for you. You know, one of the things that we have talked about a lot over the years is that, you know, you wanted to be an astronaut at 10 years old, and yet the journey wasn't linear. It didn't feel linear to you. And the same goes with me, and I put that in the opening chapter of my book, is that the lives, when we're living them, are mostly feel like you're making decisions based on triage more than anything, than a grand plan. But there was a point, I was working for Lucasfilm in 2000, this is long before Mythbusters, and I told them that I liked to do public speaking. And they said, oh, and they sent me to the Breckenridge, Colorado Film Festival to do a talk about Lucasfilm. And they were trying to figure out how to do the intro backstage, and there was like 500 people in the audience. And I was like, no, we don't have to worry about an intro. I can walk out and just start talking. And this is one of the first times I'd done public speaking. And I found that with material I had grown up with, I walked out on the stage, and I not only knew the material really deeply, but the way I was able to explain it and tell the story to the audience made them gasp. And it was one of these great evenings where I caught a glimpse of my future on that stage. And so I'm curious, as you were moving through your path to becoming an astronaut, if you have an early memory of a moment where you're like, oh, this is the path, this is where I'm going.
Yeah, there were several. One was when I first learned to scuba dive. I was only 10 years old. We were at a resort, one of those resort diving things. It's back before there was any regulation or anything. And but I got the briefing and how to use the breathing equipment and all that stuff, and it was all fine and going to be okay. And then suddenly I found myself weightless, underwater, with a whole world that I'd never seen before. It hadn't been very far away, but it was inaccessible. But now, with a little bit of technology and a little bit of training on my part, suddenly I could see what was essentially an entire new planet laid out there in front of me. And that was like a little trigger in my head also, that maybe if I gain some skills and I push technology to the edge, maybe it's going to put me in a position where I'm going to get closer to my dreams. The other thing, Adam, is you're right. Life is chaotic. I never thought I would be an astronaut. I never counted on it. But I held it up in the distance as if my life goes perfectly, and it never has, but if it goes perfectly, I want to walk on the moon. That's what I want to do. So what should I do this weekend? I mean, if I want to walk on the moon, then what should I do this weekend? Should I don't know, read about the moon, go buy a telescope, try and talk to someone who's walked on the moon, or a scientist? What's the moon made of? Why is there no erosion? Where did the moon come from? Do they have moonquakes? What, is all of those? Look at it, learn a little bit about it. And by Sunday night, I mean, I wasn't walking on the moon, but I wasn't the same kid I was on Friday evening either. I was slightly closer to my dreams. And I never wanted to say, if I don't get to the moon, I'm a failure, because I still haven't, so I'm a loser. Instead, I was like, that's what I want to do, so let's just keep working at it. And if you drag your life weekend and weekday by day in the direction of your dreams, you're inevitably going to enjoy your life more. Look at all of you. You're all here, right? At Silicon Valley Comic-Con. You could have done anything this weekend. But this is what you dream about. This is one of the cool things you imagine. And you make a deliberate step to try and get a little closer to your own dreams. And I think that is where change in life happens. And it's what allowed the two of us to do the things we like.
Totally. And then your message of the inspiration and the encouragement. I specifically remember... every comparison story I have doesn't compare to going to space. So I'm suffering little self-esteem issues up here. But years ago, I was making a prop that I wanted. It was the first time I was doing it with some actual skills because I'd been working in the film industry. And my best friend at the time, I just remember him randomly saying one day, and this is the mid-90s, hey, I think that thing you're making is really cool. I think it's cool that you're spending time on it. And just having a close friend give that encouragement. But we often don't say those important things to the people closest to us. We often don't say, I think that what you're doing is great. I think you're on the right path. I think this is really cool. But it's so resonant when you do, and when you reach out and point out that it's possible.
Often, especially the way we're all conditioned, we never really feel like we've succeeded until somebody else tells us we've succeeded. Like you could work your whole life at something and be brilliant at it, but until somebody gives you a certificate or a trophy that they got at the trophy shop for $8, you don't feel like you've actually done the thing. And yet, the reality of it is, nobody really cares what you're doing. Everybody's wrapped up enough in their own lives. You know, your mom tries to. She does her best, you know. But the reality is nobody truly cares or understands what's going on inside your head or what you're doing. And yet, we wait for other people to tell us when we've succeeded. And you've got to find a way to reconcile that in your own head. Stop waiting for other people to tell you that you are cool. You know, you are cool. It's up to you to decide if you're cool. And be good with the cool.
I find the experience of having made Mythbusters and spent so long being a science community.
Just a sec. Hey, Mythbusters. How cool is that?
Oh, here's the other story I wanted to tell. When we met Chris, Jamie and I met Chris, it was because he called us from the space station. And our shop manager came over, Carrie Huntsbarger, and she was like, Adam, Jamie and I were in his office arguing about something. And Carrie's like, this guy named Chris is on the phone. He says he's calling from space. And now knowing Chris, I pictured him up there like this. And he says, look, I'm up here. I love your guys' channel. I love testing. I want to do something together. And so we said, that's awesome. We want to figure out, we want you to eat a big bean meal and figure out if farts move you forward in zero gravity. And Chris said, absolutely, I totally want to do that. And NASA said, no way.
But in the privacy of my own spaceship, I did conduct that very experiment. The trouble is, if you think about it, you're normally wearing underwear and pants. And that is a pretty big diffuser of any gas that's coming out of your body. So there's no net propulsion, unfortunately. But if you were naked, for instance, yeah, but
That's actually a question. Are you guys never nudes on the space station?
are we what?
Are you never nudes? Do you never get totally naked on the space station?
Well, not publicly, no. There's cameras everywhere. I mean, there's no place private except inside your little sleep pod. So no, you try and be respectful. You try and stay out of other people's way. But you can even just try it, of course, if you just expel gas out your mouth. You would think maybe sneezing, which is sort of like farting the other way, but sneezing might give you propulsion. So I tried that too, but it doesn't. There's so many air currents moving around, and your body's so heavy, and the nozzle, no matter which one you're using, isn't good enough. It's not an efficient way to move around the ship.
Speaking of nozzles, I did notice that when I lost 25 pounds, my farts went up in pitch. So clearly I was working with a more efficient nozzle, I think.
Good to know. I know we need to open up the questions fairly soon. I'm running out of time. Now that we've basically dropped the bar as low as possible, I think there's someone coming around the microphone. Throw your hand up and they'll hand you a mic.
There we go, over there.
While you're up in space, have you ever had one of those situations when you were in the suit that something were to get like some sort of foreign contaminant?
Oh, that was a
Hold on, Chris, I got this one. You go.
On my very first spacewalk, I was working away. We were building the big new robot arm, the Canadarm, onto the space station, and I was working away, and suddenly my left eye was struck blind by something while I was working. Like when something horrible gets in your eye, and it hurts like crazy, and your eye snaps shut, and you rub it. So my hand came up automatically and bounced off my helmet, and I was like, boy, I'm glad nobody saw that. That was kind of stupid. But so there I'm like, my eye is hurting like crazy, and I can't touch anything with it because of the big fishbowl helmet. So I'm like, what do I do now? I can't see out of my left eye. Well, maybe that's why we have two eyes, and I can't, nobody can help me, so I'll just keep on working. But unfortunately, without gravity, tears don't fall. The ball of tear that's trying to dilute the contaminant just gets bigger and bigger on your eye until, in my case, eventually the ball of contaminated tear, whatever that contaminant was, got big enough that it went across the bridge of my nose and flowed like a tiny polluted waterfall into my other eye. And now both my eyes were blind. What do you do now? So I was like, great. I can still breathe. I can still think. Nothing changed. Every time I close my eyes, I'm blind. So it's not like the world ended. I just can't see for a while. What do I do? So I went through all the checklists in my head, couldn't do anything about it, called down to Houston, said, hey, Houston, there's some sort of contamination in my suit. I'm blind in both my eyes. What would you like me to do? But they had seen this before. Mike Collins, who orbited the moon during Apollo 11, on his first spacewalk, had exactly the same thing. In his case, it was the liquid lithium hydroxide that removes the carbon dioxide. And the lithium hydroxide's nasty, caustic stuff. When it gets in your mucous membranes, it does damage and hurts you. So they thought, maybe it's Chris's lithium hydroxide. They said, open up the valve on the side of your helmet, the purge valve, and let your oxygen flow out into space. And then the new oxygen coming in from your tank will dilute the contaminant. So I'm like, okay. So I practiced. I popped open the little purge valve. You pop it in, twist it 90, it pops out. And now picture this. I'm out there on my first spacewalk, holding onto the spaceship blind, listening to as I single-handedly am trying to repressurize the universe. But it worked. After a while, all the clean, dry oxygen flowing in out of the tank diluted or cleaned up the air enough. It evaporated my contaminated tears. It got more and more dilute. Eventually, I could start to see. I said to Houston, I can see well enough. And they didn't know anyway. And so I shut off the valve and got back to work. And it turned out the contaminant was just the anti-fog on my visor, just the oil and soap that we put on our visors. But if you put oil and soap in your eye, it can have disastrous consequences. Now we use Johnson's No More Tears, which we probably should have been using from the very beginning. Would have been smart. But I practiced for it. Since I was that little kid in a box, I've been visualizing things going wrong, visualizing failure. We call it incapacitated crew rescue. I could have asked the other astronaut to help me. The only thing you can really count on is things are going to go wrong. And get ready for those things in your life, especially if the stakes are high, because you might be blinded during your first spacewalk. Other questions? Just throw your hand up. Oh, here we go.
I have a question about you pointed out the water on the moon, just for the astronaut who's failed to get to the moon.
Hey, I'm still alive.
There's hope. You pointed out there's water on the moon. This would be a very valuable resource. But would it also be a disputed resource between different countries or even different companies that are trying to lay claim to a water deposit that someone else
Yeah, good question. Right now, the moon has no gold or diamonds or titanium or, we haven't found a regular resource that we have decided on Earth is worth developing property rights over. But water might be that. And we haven't decided yet. And there is no globally agreed to set of rules as to how we're going to divvy it up or share it. There's a lot of people working all over that. I mean, here in the US with the various asteroid mining companies, there's regulation that says if you can get there to that asteroid, it's yours. But we don't know yet how we're going to do it. But it is interesting to think about, because we're going to start living on the moon permanently over this next generation. It's the same, it's a little bigger land area than Africa. So we have an 8th continent available. And so how are we going to settle the moon? Whose laws? Is there going to be a little US and a little Russia and a little China and a little India up there? Or are we going to, on the space station, we run by a different set of laws, the International Crew Code of Conduct. In Antarctica, they have a different legal structure than they do in any other continent on Earth. So we actually, at this point in history, we can deliberately choose how we are going to be an interplanetary species. But we just have to organize ourselves and do it before, you know, the big company just go in and start strip mining the water off the moon. But I think it's an important effort. I'm involved with several efforts that are trying to help influence the conversation in exactly that way. How should we become an interplanetary species? Because how we do it on the moon will determine how we do it on Mars and everywhere else we eventually go. Stage left. Go ahead.
What's the moon made out of?
I believe it's cheese, is that right? It's a Cabot cheddar, and it's terrific in an omelet.
Pay no attention to him, he doesn't know. We didn't know what the moon was made of. That's part of the reason that we went there. What we found out is the moon is made mostly of the Earth. About almost 4.5 billion years ago, a planet the size of Mars crashed into the Earth. The Earth was still this big volcano of a place, and ripped a big section of the Earth out into orbit. And that, over millions of years, coagulated into the moon. And it used to be so close to the Earth that it went around the world every 8 hours. And the tides, the water would go up and down 200 feet because of all the gravity from the moon. But over the last 4 billion years, the moon every day is getting a little bit further and further away. But when we went to the moon, when I was a kid, and the astronauts reached down and picked up pieces of the moon, they brought them back. And they're in Houston, Texas, in a curation facility there. And when we analyze them, we find the moon is made of the pieces of that thing that slammed into the world, and it's made of the world itself, as well as all the other meteorites and asteroids that have hit the moon for the last 4 billion years. But the moon is made of little, tiny, crushed bits of rock, and it feels sort of like broken glass. Ground up, broke like sandpaper where it's come off the paper.
It's nasty stuff.
Nasty stuff, because there's no water to smooth everything out. So that's what the moon is made of.
I think we have time for one more question.
All the way in the back.
All the way in the
Center.
back. Yes.
Hi, this is a question for Adam. So, if you had been able to do an experiment with Chris, besides the farting one, which one do you think you would have done?
Well, actually, we did do one that I'm quite proud of. We sent chefs Tracy Desjardins and David Chang, both internationally renowned, amazing food artists, down to Houston's food lab. And they concocted, Tracy ended up concocting this magnificent meal, which Chris named the Spacey Tracy Burrito.
Made just from raw materials that you could find around a spaceship.
So they had a gourmet chef use what they already had and figure out how to make a gourmet meal. And I believe it's using bean paste onto a tortilla as a kind of a glue to a substrate to hold the food on.
We have tortillas that'll last 2 years up there. NASA tortillas. They're delicious. And we also did a very cool experiment on games and toys up there and how to use weightlessness to try and build a whole new, like darts or a game like that. So we tried a bunch of different things. Great team to work with, and it started the friendship that Adam and I have had, leading us to be able to talk to you here today at the Silicon Valley Comic-Con.
Well, there was this moment when we started getting the raw rushes from you, from space, and we're looking at Chris's iterations of the shots. And it was really lovely watching the rigor with which you self-produced this sequence. I mean, you spent like 10 minutes just trying to get the burrito to stay still in front of you for the shot, so it was slowly revolving in the frame. I really dug that. Chris, thank you so much for letting me join you here on stage today.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody else. I know that both of us will be around.
We will.